Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Left Hook podcast. I am James, as per usual, and as the more attentive of you may notice, I do not have Geordie next to me. However, Geordie's position is being filled in by the great and powerful Habiba,
thank you.
Who's a friend of the show. And yeah, she'll be, I think, adequately filling in Geordie's big shoes.
Thank
for
you.
us, 'cause
Geordie has joined the right, so
yeah.
jokes. He's gone on holiday.
He's gone on holidays. He's started wearing MAGA hats and he started reading libertarian economic literature, and so
we've lost him.
We've lost him for good. That's all right. As per usual, here at the Left Hook Media, we try and counter the mainstream media right cross with a strong left hook. So today we've got a bit of stuff to talk about. We're going to be talking about some local stuff happening here in our strange little state of South Australia. And then we'll be obviously kind of moving over to the rest of the world. We'll be talking about the US elections, what's happening in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So, you are good, Habiba?
Let's go.
Cool.
Good topics to talk about.
So, firstly, recently in South Australia, there has been a law passed called the Electoral Accountability and Integrity Amendment Bill 2024, which will alter political, the structure of political donations. So, Habiba, have you ever, as a private individual, donated to a political party or candidate?
I have never done so, and I never will.
Yeah.
So this law passing is a good thing. I'm surprised it didn't exist before.
Yes. Well, it is interesting because obviously you're never going to do it in the future now.
Yeah, never can now.
Never can now. So anytime there's bipartisan support, I feel like between both parties, I get a little bit skeptical. You know, I'm just like, all right. You know, usually it's something like a weapons for Ukraine or support for Israel or kind of AUKUS. You know, all these things that are a bit rough. However, so this got bipartisan support. And the way it works, it's been touted by a friend of you, Peter Malinauskas.
Peter Malinauskas.
One of your besties, obviously.
Lad.
Yeah, lad. It's been touted by him as being, kind of like a win for transparency and stuff like that. So they're saying, look, we're getting private money out of politics, and this is going to be great. However, what this actually entails is private individuals can no longer just directly donate to political parties. Instead, they will be publicly funded. So these political parties will be publicly funded by the state. So in SA specifically, this means the Parliament will allocate what's estimated to be about 15 to 20 million for party funding. And then this amount of money will get allocated to the parties depending on how many MPs they have in Parliament, not necessarily how popular they are or how many votes they have. And what this will actually do, I think some people are a bit worried about it because it will further cement the two-party duopoly. Because it'll, like the Greens are kicking up a fuss about this because they're like, well, we're just never going to get as much funding because they have bugger all seats as opposed to the Liberal and Labor. And so like 75% of this funding will just essentially go to Liberal and Labor, which is going to make it very hard for any new kind of political parties to break onto the scene. And I think that'll kind of further entrench the two-party duopoly, which is interesting. Obviously, they do have, the two parties, I think, have a pretty well-established system in Australia. In SA, definitely. Obviously, in some of the other states, it's a little bit different, but it's on the federal level also. And I think that kind of gets played to the advantages of the ruling class because they can just, essentially play table tennis, with the two parties. And it, again, everything kind of seems to drift to the right and we don't seem to get as much actual progressive policy.
There's two really interesting points about this, and I wonder if my friend Peter Malinauskas has thought deeply about how this could impact him.
Next time you catch up, you should ask him.
I will ask him because Peter Malinauskas has a brother that sits on the Santos board. And I think it was in 2022, he passed the infamous anti-protest laws in South Australia. That was after a week of Extinction Rebellion protests targeting Santos. Slapped together the bill in 20 minutes, passed it in the lower house. Yippee-ki-yay. So his brother sits on that board, and the Labour Party and fossil fuel companies rub shoulders hand in hand, eat at the same dinner table.
Yeah.
So I really wonder what this is going to mean for him and his brother. Is there a rift going on between the brothers? Can this brother no longer sponsor Labour to, propagate and cheerlead coal?
Well, what's interesting is that, interesting you mentioned that, because you can still pay, so MPs and staffers, in terms of funding, they can still pay levies to their respective parties, which I think is kind of like a levy, like a fee. And I think there are still some little loopholes, that'd be able to get through if you want to put money towards a certain, political candidate or party, etc. However, pardon me, sorry. However, private individuals can still, so if it's election season and I'm like a fossil fuel company, I can just run an ad campaign independently of the political party,
Okay.
So it doesn't, I think in terms of the big money going into it and the outcome, it won't actually change too much.
So it won't look like a donation. It's more like a favour.
Yeah, I think so.
As a gift.
Yeah, as a gift. And it doesn't go through the same rigmarole,
right?
That obviously, like in terms of declaring funding and that sort of stuff as well.
So technically, corrupt politicians can still be swayed and lobbied to, stand up for certain interests of certain individuals because they gave them a gift.
And say, Habiba, if we started the Left Hook political party, right? That would mean that we would, and say we managed to somehow scrape together enough popularity to get one seat in the state parliament. That means we would have a fractionally smaller amount of funding as opposed to the big guys, and then we wouldn't be able to go out and collect private donations to fund our political campaign in the future. Obviously, we probably will not start a left political party. You never know.
Geordie, this just sounds like another playing the Monopoly game to me, to be honest.
I know. I think that's why it got bipartisan support. Because
makes sense.
Because essentially both parties will be allowed to keep the duopoly going. I'm not sure if you remember a real watershed moment for me in state politics was a few years back. We had Nick Xenophon.
Yes, I remember him.
Do you remember when he was running in the state elections? I reckon this is maybe almost close to 8 years ago, possibly 6, 7, 8 years ago. But I remember because he was actually had quite a bit of popular support, and it seemed to be actually posing a threat to the Labor and Liberals. And I've never seen anything like it. And I wasn't as political at the time, but both parties teamed up and just destroyed his campaign, which I thought was very interesting because even though they are meant to be at odds, we still saw how they worked together, essentially, to crush any outsiders.
Any outsiders. I remember Nick Xenophon. He was quite popular. I remember he used to come and talk to university students a lot.
Yes.
And I think that's what gained popularity for him, and the Labour and Liberal were like, okay, this is something, like this is a threat for us because we don't consider them at all for anything. Well, and the hex thing, fine. We'll talk about the hex thing.
Well, yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll talk about the hexing as well.
Another interesting point, Geordie, with that, honestly, is that this public funding, is there any transparency from where it exactly comes from? Public funding, to me, it could be taxpayer. Yes, it's true. That already happens. But how much more? And exactly what does public mean? Could it be now a public corporation, no longer private? Was that to me also is very blurry. Lobbyists can still,
exactly
fund it then.
And I think once the structure for this is, is essentially in place, we're not sure how it'll be, the potential for it to be altered in the future. But they're looking at doing this federally as well, which is interesting. And they're looking at kind of, because in SA it wasn't subject to the standard scrutiny that these things, typically are before they pass, amendments to bills and stuff like that. And I think they're trying to do the same thing on a federal level. Which I think the idea was they didn't want, like, the Clive Palmer to happen again, But that being said, I'm happy with not having Clive Palmer again. But that being said, for example, because he came in, donated heaps and heaps of money, and put heaps of money into his own campaign. I don't think he had any success. But one thing I found was interesting was, do you remember Tucker Carlson came on a speaking tour of Australia not too long ago? that entire tour was funded by Clive Palmer.
Clive Palmer.
So that's
surprised.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. I do distinctly remember in watching one of his speeches and him talking about how average the Labor government is and all the kind of standard talking points that would align with, a fossil fuel mining magnate. And I thought, that was interesting. So again, that shows how you can just fund a tour or fund an ad campaign and you can kind of sway the public perception to get the same outcome.
Well, if it passes on a federal level, one nation will be impacted, family first will be impacted.
Yes.
All great things. On the other hand, someone independent like Senator Lydia Thorpe will be impacted, though I don't think she's running again. Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. And it'd be interesting to see how that will change the face of politics in Australia. Because I think obviously we have a pretty kind of like a stable two-party system, should we say. There doesn't seem to be too much threat to that. But as political and social currents change in the future, which I think will become more apparent, obviously, with cost of living and inflation and economic issues, for example. It'd be interesting to see how, I guess, the political potential for new movements will not be able to kind of metastasize in that way.
Would you consider this then a win for democracy?
I think it's a huge win for democracy.
Yeah?
No, not at all, no.
We consider it a nothing for democracy.
Democracy has taken a little baby step backwards, perhaps.
Exactly.
Dude, speaking of...
So Peter Malley, once again, has disappointed us.
Yeah.
Trying to act cool, trying to act bigger than he is, but really, nothing has happened.
Yeah, I think it's going to keep cruising. But I think as well, because the SA, I think what gives him the mandate to be able to do these things is he's kind of has excellent marketing, obviously, and he has a good marketing team. He's kind of like the handsome young dad, plays sports. He's reasonably educated.
You're a regular Aussie guy. Everyone can connect with him and his struggles.
Yeah, and his struggles with his brother, working for Santos, which, I mean, I've got two brothers that work for Santa. But I think as well, it's he also has the mandate because the Liberals in SA are so piss poor.
Yeah.
Do you remember, for any of our audience that doesn't know, we had Stephen Marshall was the Premier before this. Yes. I have seen more conviction from a soggy roll of toilet paper than from Stephen Marshall. He was just very much a nothing man, I think. Whereas Peter Malinauskas kind of exudes a little bit of, he can speak and he's a decent public speaker. I'll give him that. You know what I mean? And I think he is probably a reasonably competent bureaucrat. Whereas I got the impression Stephen Marshall was just...
He really is a nothing man. I remember a few years ago at Adelaide University, we had a protest against a NATO conference happening inside the university.
A NATO conference in Australia?
Yep.
Ah.
Exactly.
I didn't realise...
Inside Adelaide University, the most militarised university in Australia.
Dude, I didn't realise that Australia was in the North Atlantic. I'll have to check a map.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
But we hosted it.
Yeah, of course.
We welcomed them. We hosted it. So we were protesting. Stephen Marshall came in. We saw him. It was such an honour to heckle him. He head down, tail tucked between the knees, ran into the conference room. Could not look at us.
No, I can't imagine he'd be a man that would be able to handle any confrontation just based on his character.
I think he would start crying. I think he doesn't have that conviction.
Yeah, I'd almost want to give him a hug. I'd almost feel bad. Peter Malinauskas, I feel like you could get away with not feeling bad for heckling him, whereas Stephen Marshall...
Poor chap.
Come here, buddy.
It's okay. He'll be fine.
Yeah. But the SA Liberal Party has gone from bad to worse... Habiba,
they have.
With the recent resignation of the opposition leader.
David Spears.
For anyone who doesn't know in the audience, David Spears took over as the opposition leader in SA. He was the head of the Liberal Party, and he was a member of Parliament for the seat of Black,
yes.
I believe. In August this year, it was quite interesting. A whole bunch of photos were published to the newspaper. And videos and stuff, and this circulated all over the country and the state, and it was pushed quite heavily. But it showed Mr. David Spears
behind some white lines.
Yeah, behind some white lines, allegedly engaging in illicit behaviour. So there was a video of him, and he was at a house, and there was a plate on the table with, again, some white lines that were allegedly not cocaine.
Yes.
I think we can say that. I think he was maybe doing some baking or...
Yeah, baking powder.
Baking powder.
It doesn't matter that it looked, smelled, felt like cocaine. Gave the
if it looks like
reactions of cocaine,
smells like cocaine, it's obviously icing sugar.
Exactly.
Yes, he was at 3 a.m. with some friends.
Baking.
Exactly, making some frostings because he loves baking. Anyways, he has then since had to resign. He made a public video, I think, decrying this whole thing as kind of like a setup. He was like, I watched a little bit, this was a couple months ago, I believe the gist of what he was saying was, it's kind of a conspiracy to take me out. I want to fight the elites. Yes, of course.
It's the new leader of the libertarian movement in Australia.
Yeah. He's then since resigned, and I think he has to go to court as well. He has a court hearing. I believe he's being charged with supply of a controlled substance, not just possession, but supply as well. So maybe he was supplying icing sugar.
I suppose he was showcasing it to his customers at that time.
Yeah, I think so. But that's it. It's very funny. This has kind of sparked a debate in SA and in the country at large about like drug use in politics.
Yes.
I've heard that in Canberra, in Parliament House, there is quite a strong culture of kind of debauchery. From what I've heard, lots of the guys are just pissed a lot of the time.
That does happen.
Yes.
Do you remember when it came out a few years ago that one of the Liberal Party politicians went into a female staffer's office and...
Yes. And that happened.
I don't know if I can say it yet.
Yeah, no, I think you can. Maybe we can allude to it. But I think that's been quite well reported that it's just kind of, in Canberra especially, it was like a boys' club, like a drinking boys' club. And we see that reflected, for example, when you have public meltdowns by fellas like Barnaby Joyce. Yeah. When the cameras catch him just
That's
drunk,
true.
passed out on a footpath, and you think, wow, quality. Sophisticated.
Class.
Politics, class, obviously. But that's obviously kind of, there's also been allegations of it being a very kind of toxic, kind of anti-woman culture in politics as well. But this has sparked a debate, and it's a debate we needed to have about drug use in politics. And so, interestingly enough, I think in order to try and gain back a bit of respectability amongst the public, David Spears' replacement in the seat of Black, which I believe the Liberals just lost anyways. Massively. I believe that just happened. But his replacement, Amanda Wilson, has actually proposed drug testing all members of state parliament at random times. And I got this. I think this was obviously a move to kind of trying to claw back a bit of whatchamacallit, a bit of respectability, I guess, that they've obviously lost. But it was funny because I think this has had overwhelming support amongst the public. Like, they were interviewing, I think it was 7 or 9, they were going around asking people about this, and they'd, have some kind of bogan Aussie tradie, and the standard response is, I have to get drug tested.
Exactly.
Why shouldn't the politicians?
That's true.
Yeah, and we've also seen they've passed through, in terms of people on welfare, they've started passing through legislation mandating that they'll have to be subject to random drug tests also. And so the idea is, and their argument was, if, that kind of tough on crime, tough on welfare argument, if they're, getting paid by the state, by the taxpayers' money, then they should be subject to drug tests, which I guess that is a kind of valid argument, but at the same time, I think that should apply to
these politicians
as well.
And the fact that it hasn't happened before, these laws didn't exist before. David Spears had to bring shame to the entire nation.
Yeah.
South Australia, Peter Malinauskas had to bow his head and shake his head. Yeah. That's true. That's true.
And I guess, but I think these people are arguably more parasitic welfare recipients than. By getting their entire salaries paid for by the state than the poor lower income.
100%.
Yeah, 100%.
And for achieving what? One could argue.
One could argue, yes.
One could argue.
Well, look, I guess this is a progressive bill. I will support this.
I'm supportive of this bill.
I'm supportive of this bill. Do you know who wasn't especially supportive of this bill?
Ooh, let me guess.
Your friend, Peter Malley. And his response was, look, mate, it's not really something that's crossed my mind for good reason.
Look, I'm not saying anything, but maybe there's a reason why he has the body he has.
Yeah. He's always shredding, obviously.
I'll tell you something funny. When the most recent news broke out about David Spears in court and everything, he did not make it to the front page of the Advertiser. I did. So I beat him in that regard.
Good work. Good work. Even though it was a scandal, still wasn't as important as your work.
Me saying the West designated Nelson Mandela as a terrorist in the past. That was
exactly.
a lot more important.
A lot more, as it should be. But maybe, because I always think about when you see these political attacks in the media, I always wonder what is the purpose behind it. Because obviously has to be some, maybe I'm just very cynical. I just do not believe we have a free and open media. So when I see a concerted attack on someone, especially someone like David Spears, and I'm sure he was a flog, I'm sure he wasn't a very competent man, because I think the footage kind of proves that he was not politically savvy, because why would you be doing that, for one? And two, why would you allow people to film it? But I always think, what was the motivation at play behind all the media outlets?
There always is a reason.
There always is a reason.
And I wonder why. That's true.
Maybe to distract, or maybe he had pissed off some of the power brokers in the state that we don't hear about, and they wanted to get rid of him. I genuinely don't know. But I think that's
federal elections are coming up, state elections are coming up. These parties are considering attacks on each other from months in advance.
But I think as well, look, maybe even the Liberal Party realised, look, this bloke's an absolute liability. We have to. Yeah, he isn't a good representative of our party, which is interesting. And so look, this is supported, the proposition of drug testing policies, supported by Vincent Tarzia, who's the opposition leader. And again, I think Malley was kind of indifferent to it. But yeah,
it needs to happen. And by the way, I feel like many politicians will get caught. And I look forward to that.
Oh, yeah, so do I. I think anecdotally, I've heard that this is quite a common thing to happen in Canberra, and probably in the state parliament as well. So yeah, we'll see. And it's good to see that at least on some level, these people are being held to the same standard of accountability as everyday Aussies.
I wonder if this is going to sway at all the conversation around decriminalising drugs, if at all, because it's an important conversation and it's often had amongst the lower class Australians.
Yes, yeah.
But this is ruling class now. And
exactly. And I think it is interesting because typically when we think of drugs as well, the people that probably suffer the most from drug offences, I'd imagine, would typically be in the very lower socioeconomic ladder. Whereas this is probably a prime example of someone that's higher up in the kind of ruling circles that's actually getting some sort of punishment for it.
That has power and influence. And under the influence of drugs, this does affect our democracy. We didn't vote for you on the basis of you being on cocaine.
Yes, exactly. And also you have to take into account people's decision-making abilities and critical thinking abilities if they are, of course, intoxicated. I still will not let that take anything away from Barnaby Joyce. Habiba, so we're obviously talking about all these happenings and going-ons locally, but obviously, as you may have heard,
around the other side of the world,
yes, there has been some other stuff going on.
Someone's back.
You might have heard about this tiny little thing. It didn't get much media coverage. The US election.
Oh, yeah, I saw something on that.
I saw a couple of things about it. Likewise. I have to ask you, because I haven't spoken to you since, what are your thoughts on the return of the Don?
Inevitable.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I think that, interestingly enough, I think his election win wasn't necessarily a right-wing knee-jerk. I think that he won a lot on economic policy. Small business owners really wanted to have these tax breaks. They really wanted a boost in jobs as well, to employ more people, to get more production made. And so I think that's what crossed him over the line. And he even won the popular vote this time. So I'm not... And Kamala, on the other hand, the Democratic Party, the past 4 years, they've seen a lot of mess-ups. The American working class saw them screw up, saw them going to war. America's always in war, one way or another. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough. It wasn't good enough. Kamala's campaign was entirely based on a meme. She had no policies to bring forth. Celebrity endorsements did not work, thank God.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
Because that would have been very dire for
For humanity as a whole, shall we say. Yeah.
I'm not surprised. This is still really bad, still very dangerous. Do I think much will change materially? Materialistically, not really. No, I don't. But things will become worse, and they would have become worse in a different way under Kamala. They'll become worse in a different way under Trump. Eventually, we would need to move past liberalism to defeat fascism.
Yes. Well, I think the closer, just a quick point, I think liberalism and fascism are two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
I think the further the descent of the empire goes, shall we say, I think the more the liberals will resort to fascism to protect capitalism, shall we say. Paraphrasing the words of the great Michael Parenti.
That's true. And all these diehard Democrats and liberals, when they lost, they were very much like, Gaza will be flattened now.
Well, they did. I did see that. I did see quite a bit of backlash from, again, the kind of the liberal class, the Democrat voting liberal class, saying things like essentially blaming like the Muslim vote and blaming the Latino vote, for example. And you think, wow, it's quite a mask off.
It really is.
Yeah.
And very much celebrating the violence that will come from it, even though the past 4 years and the past 13 months, Gaza has been in hell because of you and your politics and your party politics. But there you go. It's a mask off, very much. It's the famous saying, you scratch a fascist and a liberal and a fascist bleeds.
Yes,
that's true.
Exactly. I do think it's interesting because obviously, Kamala kind of ran on a platform of, well, don't worry, guys, because nothing will change. And I think a lot of people wanted things to change. So I think for a lot of the population, seeing that, for example, obviously she would say that to the donors. She'd say that to the donors, the big corporations, say, don't worry, guys, nothing will change. In terms of foreign policy, I think she one time made a statement about Gaza, being like, I guess maybe expressing a little bit of sadness that all these people had died, and then she immediately her team came out afterwards and were like, oh, don't worry, foreign policy, nothing's going to change. And I think, obviously, for the population, even though I personally don't think much will materially change, like you were saying, under Trump, I think for the population having kind of it was necessary to have a shift in leadership.
Agreed.
And I'm not surprised.
And I'm never going to forget that during the presidential debates between these two, they were fighting each other on who loves Israel more.
Yeah, you did.
And Trump was threatening America and the lobbyists and all these weapons companies and the Zionist candidates that, hey, under Kamala, Israel would not exist in 3 years' time.
Yep.
Which is a beautiful vision and dream to have.
I know. Did he want me to vote for Kamala?
Why is he threatening us with a good time?
Yeah, that's it. No, it was really fascinating because, like you said, he also ran on the platform of kind of being, and this kind of I think became over the last couple of years became bigger in the alternative media kind of sphere. It became we'll end the Russia-Ukraine war. So I think they were very much against the idea of having the proxy war, using Ukraine as a proxy to fight Russia. Obviously, whatever your thoughts on that are, but I think it was quite obvious that it was quite a transparent ploy by
definitely,
especially the Democrats. And he kind of ran on that, and I think that's given lots of people the impression of, well, Trump won't get us into any new wars, and he's an anti-war candidate. But then you look at all his cabinet, and they are all ardent Zionists.
Hardcore Zionists.
So you are familiar with Miriam Adelson?
Yes, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes. So she donated, I believe, about $100 million to the campaign of Donald Trump. She is the widow of the late Israeli oligarch Sheldon Adelson. Mm-hmm. And essentially, I believe the conditions of this donation were obviously, uncritical support for Israel, and also kind of formalising American support for the complete annexation of the West Bank, and I guess formalising kind of the end of the Palestinian state, or what barely exists of it, which is, again, terrifying. Interestingly
enough, this motion was put into plan during the Biden administration. So they're just carrying on that legacy, but finally stamping it.
Stamping it, of course. And again, like we're saying, the Democrats would kind of, I think they'd have the ability to kind of and ah about it and kind of attempt to dance on both sides of the issue, whereas someone like the Don can just come out,
mask off, exactly.
And can just come out and just go, let's go for it.
This is how it is. And in one way, this is a favor to those that are resisting the war machine and the imperialist project of Zionism in America, because at least they don't have to argue and waste their time trying to convince other people that the Democrats are not working in our favor, they're not for peace, they're not trying for a ceasefire. 13 months of Kamala trying, she failed to do a ceasefire. Trying,
yes.
So in one way, this transparency, this brutal honesty, this direct fascism in our faces is going to help our cause. And I'm glad about that in that sense. And I truly see that here in Australia, the public reaction would be like, okay, Trump won. Oh, no, we have an election coming up. We need to be careful which way we're headed. It can happen in one or two ways where people can be like, oh, yeah, excellent, a change of leadership. Let's vote in Peter Dutton or Trump. But back to Trump.
Back to Trump. Yeah, of course.
Him appointing all these cabinet ministers that are essentially his friends as well.
And it's hilarious because obviously I think there was I have a list of some of his cabinet ministers here that we're just going to go over quickly.
Let's go over it.
Because they're funny. But it's interesting because obviously he's kind of had this image of, we're not going to have the NeoCons in charge, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then after looking at his list of picks for his cabinet, I thought, these aren't the NeoCons, these are the NeoNeoCons. These are the new NeoCons. So,
hardcore.
Firstly, he has Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Marco Rubio is referred to by Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, as Narco Rubio. when I have heard this talked about, are you familiar with Anya Parampil, the journalist?
A little bit. Please tell me more.
She works for The Grey Zone.
Okay.
And she's just recently written a book called Corporate Coup. I think she worked for... I think she might have worked for like Press TV or RT. Like she's done a bit of stuff in the past. She's based in the United States, writes for The Grey Zone, and she just recently has published a book called Corporate Coup. I haven't read it yet. I'm very keen to read it.
It's on my list immediately.
Yes, and it's about obviously the US, all their attempts to overthrow Venezuela, and kind of how, again, the corporations have orchestrated these failed coups. In the book, and I haven't read this, but I've heard her talk about it quite a bit. She goes into the history of Marco Rubio, because Marco Rubio's family, he is from Florida. So obviously there's this large contingent of the kind of anti-Castro Cubans, and that is quite a reactionary base for the Republican Party as well. And Marco Rubio came out and he was like, my family escaped, the communist hell escaped Cuba, rah, rah. Turns out his family actually came from Cuba before Castro came into power, so they emigrated under Fulgencio Batista. The horrible right-wing military
story
dictator.
as old as time.
It is, and then blame, and then they can just blame Fidel, etc. However,
Narco.
Narco. No, this is the best part. I've heard her in this book. Apparently, she has detailed the fact that Narco Rubio, when he was a younger man, his brother-in-law, whose name escapes me at the moment, ran one of the biggest cocaine trafficking operations in Florida. And apparently Marco lived in the same house this operation was being run out of. Too good. But he apparently had no idea. So maybe he's just like David Spears, man. They were just supplying baking ingredients, for example.
He had no idea. But unlike David Spears, he has gotten a promotion.
Yes, he's got exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's just bloody hilarious. And the list keeps getting better. Peter Hesketh, I believe his name is. He is the Secretary of Defense. This guy, I saw a video of him talking. He is a walking Monster Energy can. He is just like the most fantastic, super kind of like going for that real rural American vibe, pit vipers, covered in tattoos. I've seen a photo of him shirtless. He has all these like Knights Templar tattoos. The Knights Templar, a very progressive organisation. But he was actually, so I believe he was in the US military, and then he was a Fox News host. So he was an analyst on Fox News.
Two of the best American things to come out of their project.
Yes, exactly.
Media, state apparatus, and the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, man.
Best of both worlds.
Best of both worlds. But dude, can you imagine if, for example, you worked for like Waleed Ali on the project?
Oh,
if
my
goodness. If they just promoted that man to Secretary of Defense, you know. You think, look, maybe not the best pick. However, funny, we'll see how it goes. I've seen him have some horrible takes on US foreign policy that I definitely disagree with. He is looking... Now, the Don is following this up with Matt Gaetz as his Attorney General. Now, have you heard of Matt Gaetz?
No.
He, under the last administration, I believe, was charged with having inappropriate relations with a minor.
Okay, I thought that was him. Yes. All right.
Now, I do not know the specifics of this. And he claims, obviously, that when the Democrats were weaponizing the justice system as if that's not something that every party has done whenever they've been in power. And he claimed this is all false, etc., etc. However, it's just an interesting choice of character. You think maybe they would be able to find someone competent that hadn't been accused of such an allegation, because I think that just kind of tarnishes everything. So I'm not saying anything, but interesting choice.
James, at this point, this portfolio, I think, represents America at its best, to be very honest. The US of A, all of these things, you can summarize it in
this is the cream, this is the cream of the crop.
This administration is America.
This is. Now we have Tulsi Gabbard, who was from the Democrats, the Hawaiian, I think she's a congresswoman from Hawaii. I think she has undergone a really interesting political arc because she was originally a Democrat and she kind of ran on she was like a veteran and she was, quite like a young, refreshing, active woman. She was a veteran also, and I do find it interesting because she was the only person in the US that was against the dirty war in Syria. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. She actually went to Syria and had a conversation with Bashar al-Assad in Syria and was kind of, being like, hey, just letting you know, not everyone in the US wants to keep supporting Al-Qaeda, obviously, and ISIS. So I thought that was really interesting. And she was a Democrat, and I think she has been obviously disillusioned with the Democratic Party. And obviously she has been picked as a cabinet member in the Republican administration. I think it's interesting that lots of these, it's a real weird crossover because we talked about this last week. You have people like Liz Cheney, daughter of Dick Cheney, the benevolent, advocating for Kamala, and then at the same time you have these Democrats that were former Democrats that are now advocating for Republicans. So I think it's interesting. There's kind of a convergence of some of these people, and I just thought, interesting to know.
That's interesting. I'm very fascinated by this arc. So now she's a cabinet member under Trump.
I believe she's proposed as the director of national intelligence.
Of national intelligence. Well, I wonder what she has to say on Palestine and what her thoughts are. Because if she was against the dirty war in Syria,
she's a Zionist. But that's what I found was interesting. She was the only person that was publicly against it. But then again, there's obviously some cognitive dissonance there because, again, there's one underlying theme to all of these characters that I think we can discuss afterwards. But before we get down that rabbit hole, we have the ambassador to the UN is a lady called Elise Stefanik.
I know her.
You know her. Rabid Zionist, frothing at the mouth.
Absolutely. I think she's happy with this new proposed position.
I think she'll be very happy with it because... so if you guys remember, to the audience, if anyone has paid particular attention to the United Nations recently, the ambassador was this lady, I believe her name was Linda Thomas Greenfield, and she was quite a meek character. Obviously, she always, towed the line and represented the United States' interest at the UN, but she was just very quiet. She never said anything. She would just kind of quietly vote and then just kind of disappear. And she was a woman of colour as well, which I think was kind of maybe... added a veneer of progressiveness.
That's true.
So they can, again, advocate for, continuing to supply Israel, but don't worry, you have a woman of colour doing it, so that makes it good.
Voting against ceasefires one after the other.
Yes, yep, exactly.
It was a black lady, it's fine.
It's fine, yep. So Elise Stefanik, look, I just went on her X account earlier before the pod, and I was just scrolling through. Every single day, she has a post, day 404. Hamas still has the hostages captive, day 405. We will never forget the October 7th. And I was like, man, you've been doing this for 405 days. Don't you have something, even if that's your conviction, like whatever, you surely have something better to do with your time. Dude, lastly,
so this is what we're up against. Okay,
yeah,
tell me more.
Lastly,
lay it on me.
We have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I think this is interesting.
This is.
Because I have always found Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be an interesting character. I think he has done a lot of good work as an environmental lawyer. I read his book on Anthony Fauci, which is wild, I have to say. He brings up a lot of interesting points. I'm not going to get into too specifically. Obviously, you can guess kind of the thrust of the book. But it essentially details how much of a failure the American kind of biomedical, industrial, military intelligence, I think we can link all these things together.
Yeah.
The complex is, and it's obviously in the United States, it's has the worst health outcomes, one of the worst health outcomes in the developed world, and it's also the most expensive medically in the developed world. So you think, how is it so expensive, yet it's the sickest nation? And he goes through lots of factors and has a pretty interesting analysis, I found. He's also been openly kind of critical of the history of the intelligence agencies in the US. Mm-hmm. He's talked about, look, obviously, I think it's kind of consensus agreement that they killed his father and they killed his uncle.
Yes.
Or they were at least a part of that was responsible for it. And he was obviously against the war in Ukraine as well, which I thought was very refreshing. However, one area where he has completely towed the line was the issue of support for Israel. Of course, you're seeing the theme here, Habiba.
Yes.
You can see the theme.
I wonder what it is, though. It's so strange. If they have the ability to recognize the US's wrongdoing in other places, why not in Palestine and Israel?
Exactly. And it's actually, so I'm not sure how legitimate this is, but it is theorized, obviously, the kind of quite exciting. I've done a lot of research on this because I find it a very interesting topic, is obviously the 50s and 60s in the United States. You kind of have this overlap of intelligence, crime, drug dealing, for example, internationally, and these things all kind of converge in like the intelligence apparatus of the US. And so obviously one of the accepted theories is that the reason, we're not going to go spend too much time on this, one of the reasons is that the reason John F. Kennedy was assassinated is because he refused to provide air support for the Bay of Pigs invasion. He was against the war escalating in Vietnam, and that's why he had various powers at be. So it was a combination of like the mafia, Cuban exiles, and people in intelligence that orchestrated his assassination.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty kind of commonly accepted. I think with these kinds of things, there's never one reason why these things happen.
Of course.
But apparently, he also wanted to recognise AIPAC as he wanted to put them on the foreign agents registration list.
Yes.
And then obviously he was killed.
Yes.
And then they have never...
It never happened. It never went through.
Yep.
It's almost as if to be a successful member of the government in the US of A, you have to fit a very specific mold. And that very specific mold looks like whatever best interests Israel at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Because there is still, on all other issues, there is kind of like a spectrum of debate and a spectrum of permissible thought and opinion. But it does seem that on this one issue, we have... complete consensus.
Unconditional loyalty and backing for Israel.
It's amazing. So that's RFK Jr. And he's kind of come in with a mandate of I'll do my worst RFK Jr. accent. We're going to clean up America. Seed oils are destroying America, which all good things, you know. I'm all for healthy diets and healthy lifestyle. The last one, this is a joke. This has to be a troll. Is Elon Musk.
Yeah, yes. I was going to ask.
Yes, one of the richest men on the planet. And Vivek Ramaswamy. They are supposedly going to be heading up a newly created government department called the Department of Government Efficiency.
Oh, government efficiency.
Government efficiency.
If they're doing their job right, like of military coups and political coups of other countries. Like in Bolivia, when he openly admitted they were behind that because he needed lithium for Tesla.
I need that lithium, bro.
So, of course.
Of course. But I find it...
What a joke.
Absolutely hilarious. One, I believe the mandate of this department is that we are going to cut down on wasteful bureaucracy and spending. You know, the US is in debt. You know, the US government is this big bloated inefficient mass, so we're going to clean up the whole thing. And in order to achieve this, they have created another completely useless government department and what will be a whole new bureaucracy to achieve this. Hilarious. One thing I'm sure of, though, is that Elon Musk's contracts with the US government will definitely not be trimmed. I'm sure there'll be no in terms of government efficiency, there'll be no reduced spending in terms of the military budget.
What a good lesson for us, because when Trump was not president, Elon Musk, one of the world's most richest people, business owner, capitalist, and Trump, they didn't get along. In fact, even Trump was exiled from the land of X, whatever you want to call that now. And now look, so it's almost like whoever's in government will have an immediate buddy with relationship with the country's capitalists.
I think so.
What a good lesson.
What a good lesson. I think what I find interesting is that it's always obviously that relationship's always been there between, you know, the kind of the richest, the moguls in any given society, the rich capitalist ruling class and politics. I think you'd be naive to think that.
Well, that's how Trump came into presidency, as a billionaire.
As a billionaire in the first place. But it is interesting that he's so, it's just so transparent. Yeah. And they seem to have cultivated a bit of a cult of personality, especially amongst Trump and Elon, where it's just people are so excited and celebrating this, which, I mean, you can be excited for whoever you want, you know, but I also think that, man, these people do not have the best interests of the American...
it's the facade of innovation and technology and economic progress and economic boosts.
But as well, and obviously they love trumpeting this kind of free market, quasi-libertarian free market. You just have to let the market go, you know, let the market go, let it rip. It's beautiful. But at the same time, how much of Elon Musk's wealth came from government contracts? You know, whereas whether it's SpaceX satellites, whereas Tesla, battery technology, green technology, you know, so there's no intellectual consistency in my point of view in relation to that.
And this is an absolute joke, honestly. It's like if Albanese came and put Gina Reinhardt and she has her own ministry suddenly.
Dude, if Peter Dutton wins, I think they'll go mask off and they will give her, it's probably Department of
Environmental Affairs.
And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. Something like that. I would not be surprised. Now, Habiba.
Yes.
I think I might have alluded to this earlier. What do you think the common theme behind all these appointments is?
Apart from being disgraceful, shameful, disgusting, anti-human, war criminals, convicted, all of them of one crime after another. Apart from all this, I think the common theme, honestly, is Zionism and their love and support for Israel.
How wild. How crazy. Like, honestly, that is...
It's no coincidence.
No, it is no coincidence. Habiba.
Yes.
All these cabinet picks, this like comedy troupe of fools, shall we say, that are going to be potentially running the cabinet, obviously they have all expressed their loyalties to this one specific political cause, the cause of Zionism.
Yes.
How do you think this will impact US foreign policy in the future? Because you are very well versed in this subject. How do you think that will impact US foreign policy in the future? And how do you think this will reflect on decision making in regards to the ongoing genocide and also the balancing of tensions and escalations in the Middle East as a whole?
Well, I think the genocide will rage on, as it is already happening. The military supply of aid to Israel has continued through the Biden administration and will carry on into the Trump administration. So in regards to the oppression that Palestinians are facing, it will continue. Nothing will change in that regard. Biden shut down UNRWA. Trump has no intention of reopening it. And Trump eventually will have to make his annual formal visit to Israel. I don't know if he'll do that now because of the war going on. But when he does that, he'll have to shake hands with Netanyahu. They'll have to do their formal display of solidarity to each other, to the world.
Trump will have to go and kiss the wall.
Kiss that wall, even though he's not Jewish, and I believe that's only reserved as a Jewish rite of worship. I don't know, actually.
I think it's a humiliation ritual.
It is a humiliation
ritual. I think it is.
In all honesty.
Continue.
And so I'm not going to hold out hope that Trump will do something better for Gaza at all. I'm holding out hope for the resistance front. I'm holding out for Iran's legal right to retaliate, which they have promised they will, and the nature of it, as I quote, is knock their teeth out.
Yes.
So this is what I hold out hope for, what will change in the region. Our protests, our solidarity movements here, how we can help them through even public awareness, applying pressure on our universities, applying pressure where we can.
Well, we have actually seen, not to cut you off, but we have seen the sustained public pressure all over the world, even like the kind of little meager things we do here in SA. We've seen, actually companies starting to divest from Israel.
That's true.
Barclays Bank has announced that, divesting all investments from Israel and stuff like that. So I think it's important to note that these things, even though it feels like you can't achieve anything, there are still these small incremental gains.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think our solidarity will amplify. The anti-war movement will amplify under Trump. Right now, the IDF have stated that they want to occupy Gaza up until the end of 2025. This is another word for colonialism and occupation.
And I guess all the native Palestinians that live in Gaza, they would just disappear?
Vanish.
Yeah.
And you know what, James? It's really horrible to say, but these weapons are being used on them where they literally disintegrate into nothing. Undisclosed, nameless weapons that are illegal, that are being battle tested right now. What they do to the Palestinians is they absolutely cease to exist because they just vanish.
Yeah.
And that is what they're doing. These are the crimes and horrors of the Zionist entity. This is what our governments, this is what Trump and Biden ruthlessly support. And as we mentioned earlier, the annexation of the West Bank, it's continuing. It's illegal settlements, illegal annexation. It continues. You read reports that in Gaza, you're walking the streets and you see beating hearts by itself just on the street because of an explosion.
Goodness.
It's disgusting. Vaccination centers are being bombed. Refugee, one after the other, massacres on the daily. And I'm afraid that under Trump, it's going to continue.
One thing I think you said is interesting is that a possibility is that with such a blatantly aggressive stance that his cabinet will most likely, and his administration, we could call it a regime even, they love saying the Iranian regime, the Putin regime, the Trump regime, or the Biden regime, that his regime will, because their stance will just be so aggressive, that will galvanise the support of more people, like of more of the population, if that makes sense. For example, because under the Democrats, it was kind of like you didn't have that Democratic base really participating in activism, whereas now that Trump's doing it, that will mobilise that entire Democratic base to be more vocal.
That's true.
So,
one thing that could be different, James, is Biden said no to Israel's plans to go to war with Iran and attack the nuclear facilities. Trump was responsible for the illegal assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in 2020. As he was in Iraq, Baghdad, for peace talks and negotiations between Iran and neighboring countries. They went in, and they killed him. So Trump, I believe, hasn't really made a particular stance about war with Iran yet, or he's pro it from what I've last heard. That could be something very different in the face of a regional war going forward.
Yes. Well, I believe as well, from what I've heard, is that it's actually the Pentagon and the actual military kind of brass and the planners that are going to the administration. I believe this is under the Biden regime. I'm going to say regime. Under the Biden regime, where they actually said, like, we do not want to escalate with the Iranians because it will just be a quagmire that we will never be able to win, essentially. And I think, obviously, it's funny that the military are the ones saying, offering kind of this sober, wise advice, should we say.
That's true, because Netanyahu has gone completely rogue. And by the way, most recently, it was found out that he absolutely administered and authorized the pager attacks in Lebanon.
Yes, that does not surprise me at all.
So he's gone crazy. That man is rogue. He has no limits. He has no sense of humanity. He is bound by no law because he has impunity. And he will see death and destruction wherever he goes. And he will implement it. So that's true. The military stepped in and said, hey, under Biden regime, no war with Iran. It'll be interesting what Trump does. This is just a speculation. Just a speculation. I feel like Trump's inauguration day, Iran will do something spicy to take away attention.
Ooh, that would be quite interesting, actually, I have to say. Did you see we talked about this, I think, last week or the week before, the thwarted assassination plot against Trump?
I did.
Like the day after he was elected, and then they came out with this plot, and it was supposedly by a gentleman who was hired by the IIG. It was a whole bunch of like kind of word salad, and it didn't really seem very coherent. Yeah. It also seemed like this man had told the FBI about it as well. And then, and then he'd obviously fled the country and was reportedly in Tehran. But it was funny because I thought, wow, as soon as he has won the vote, immediately all these news outlets are dropping this same story. And will that be then ammunition to manufacture support for for a potential war against Iran as well? And that's what I thought was interesting. So I think there are some people that want to do that.
I think moving forward, we're going to see a lot of propaganda come out against Iran in the next coming months. A lot of propaganda that will manufacture this sort of consent that, hey, we need to invade Iran. We need to militarily do something against Iran, to bring them human rights.
Of course, yes.
This is something I absolutely predict. It's a very dirty trick. It's always been used. It's going to happen because Iran is going to retaliate and they're waiting for it. But we don't know when, we don't know how. They've said at the right time, at the right place. So they're doing their own calculations. I really, really have a lot of hope in the resistance front. Right now in southern Lebanon, they are absolutely smashing the IOF.
Yes.
The IOF keep trying to invade and they would need to retreat. Injured, dead, killed because Hezbollah are militarily impacting them a lot. Even so, before Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was killed, he actually told them, if you income, I promise you will have no tanks left.
Yes.
And one thing with that man is that his promises are always fulfilled.
He was very prescient in that matter.
He was.
In that regard, wasn't he?
I loved it. I loved how he addressed the media. I loved how he addressed the people. I don't know, 2006, do you remember he was being live interviewed? And he was like, we have a surprise for you, by the way, to the U.S. 1, 2, 3, goes to the U.S. Navy ship in the coast of Lebanon. Boom, explodes. Wow. He's like, 1, 2, 3, go.
Yeah. Wow.
So
I think he was obviously
incredible.
He represented a real level of intelligence, I think.
Yes.
That is probably not seen in the same way in Western, shall I say, in Western kind of military and political leadership, I think, as well.
In the West, there's no military heroes. We have Ben Robert Smith.
A true hero. A true Aussie hero. Yeah.
That's who we have. Yeah. It's as a resistance front, it's so different. Immense hope in them. Most recently, Yahya Sinwar, the assassinated leader of Hamas, who in his final battle threw a stick at an Israeli drone because he had an amputated arm under rubble. Yep. He was amongst people. He died during combat. They said that he was hiding amongst women and children.
Yep.
They said They say that he was a coward. No, he was on the front line. Most recently, the autopsy revealed that he hadn't eaten for 3 days.
Yes, I did that also. That is crazy. So he was so directly. He's on the front line with his guys, directly engaging what they perceive to be a threat to them.
That's right.
Unlike Bibi Netanyahu,
Exactly.
for example, who I'm not sure if he has experience in the military, or other people like Itamar Ben-Gvir,
Yeah.
who doesn't seem like a physically very fit man, just
No.
looking at him. And I think probably his experience is leading rabid settler gangs to beat up innocent villagers.
That's
in
true.
the West Bank, essentially.
As if they don't have an issue bombing women and children and killing them and attacking them if Yahya Sinwar was hiding
But
there.
Habiba, like you said, they're bringing them human rights, obviously.
That's true.
Yeah, so it's scary. Like the whole situation, I'm personally quite worried. Still worried. I believe that the resistance will triumph in the end. I think that the arc of history is going to curve in such a way that we will see the triumph and the end to this kind of Atlantic colonialism in the Middle East. But I'm really worried about the loss of life that will incur and the destruction that will occur along the way.
The bloodshed is horrifying. It's absolutely distressing. People in the community are really deeply impacted by it. And that's the human touch. That's the human element of this war, of this genocide. Because every day it's torn limbs of children. Every day it's prisoners. You hear of prisoners being raped to death. This is what's happening right now in the West Bank from October 7, 2023 to now. Right now, Al Jazeera reported yesterday that 6,700 people were abducted and arrested without charges.
Awful.
It's awful.
Awful, yeah. And this, I guess, represents continuity because even though all this other stuff is happening in Gaza, this level of repression has existed in the West Bank the entire time, I believe.
It has.
Yeah.
It has. West Bank has been under complete martial law by the IOF.
It is. I think the whole situation is an absolute tragedy, I believe.
And Gaza needs our solidarity. They do. We still need to speak out for them. Whatever happens, we can't give in to that despair. It's very easy to do so, but they need our voice and solidarity, and that will never stop.
No.
Israel hasn't achieved its goals in Gaza. It hasn't been able to eradicate Hamas. From my research, Hamas membership has increased.
Yes. I have also seen similar figures, yeah.
That just goes to show the military plan, it's bloodshed. That's what their intention, that's their plan. It's bloodshed continuously.
Extermination.
Yeah.
Under a flaky patina of eliminating Hamas. They're, using that as the pretense to carry out the ethnic cleansing and, again, establish the greater state.
We'll see Israelis booking boat tours to go and look at the destruction in Gaza.
That was the bit that did it for me, I think. I thought, wow, that is awful.
Jokes on them. It got all cancelled when Iran retaliated.
Yes. But even then...
and tens of thousands left and fled.
We're talking about the human cost, but even on the Israeli side, there is a large human cost, not just in casualties, in direct military casualties, but also in the amount of I would say suicides, the massive number of suicides by Israeli troops and reservists, for example. And so I think even they are not psychologically equipped to be able to undertake this the continuation of this project. And I do wonder at what point, because I think there will have to be a breaking point in their own society.
Absolutely.
I believe a society that's that, say, ultra-nationalistic and racist, I'll just say it, in my opinion. I can't see how a society with that many, that's being crushed under the weight of its own contradictions, can survive under so much pressure for so much longer.
It can't. No, this is the same as the Iraq War. The soldiers coming out of the Iraq occupation and the massacres, the genocide, over 1 million Iraqis were killed. They came out, and the highest cause of death in the U.S. Army at that time was suicide, rather than warfare and combat.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a horrible statistic, and I think as well it when you think about stuff like that, I think that reflects on how unmotivating it is for a soldier. Because obviously, I know people in the military. I generally don't wish harm upon anyone, but I do think that if, for example, you are defending your country or defending something, an ideal that you believe in or a cause, or fighting for what you believe is the betterment of humanity as a whole, I think you will be more able to undertake these tasks. Obviously, it's probably still psychologically damaging, but I think how many soldiers in our recent overseas expeditions have not even had the belief or the conviction in what they're doing is correct.
That's true.
You know, and I think that is so reflective in these massive numbers of, again, suicides and stuff like that as well. And it also is a huge indictment on the government, especially in the United States, but in Australia as well, it's a massive problem.
Absolutely.
But in the United States, that they can't offer the adequate support for these people afterwards. And obviously the Israeli government
The
can't
amount
do it
of
either.
homeless veterans in the US speaks all for itself.
It's awful. It really is awful.
It is.
The amount of homeless people in general is awful. But
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it just goes to show you gave your life, your body, your loyalty, your time to serve this country, who in the end left you on the streets.
Yeah, and they throw you aside.
Throw you
essentially.
aside.
Throw you aside. Now, Habiba, let's talk about some other stuff. Let's segue before we finish up. Speaking of streets, you saw the riots, the anti-Semitic pogroms in Amsterdam?
As the Zionists are calling it, the Hamasterdam. That's what they're calling it.
Whoa, that's hilarious. Yeah.
I saw.
Yeah. What did you think? What did you think of this?
Well, as per usual, every Zionist accusation is a confession. So, these hooligans that after a football match came out and then were just anti-Semitic attacks all over them, like the Hamasterdam people really attack human rights, shame, anti-Semitic, wrong, poor Israelis. That wasn't the case, evidently, at all.
I think it was funny because when I saw that, I thought, the Netherlands, a historic protector of the Semitic peoples, hilarious. But it since has come out, obviously, that was something that was very much encouraged by the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans beforehand.
As come out by Amsterdam police themselves in their investigation.
I have seen that also. Yeah, again, we haven't seen any real reflection of that in our media.
No, our foreign minister, Senator Penny Wong, decided that she wasn't too far away from the situation this time.
Of course.
And actually condemned it, the violence and the hatred.
Yes, and she could, again, very comfortably and conveniently speak out against this. But
exactly.
Against the far more horrific things that we're seeing, she can obviously maintain an ambivalent
It became
tone.
an international incident because, number one, Zionists are professional victims. And it's really funny. One of the people that were involved in beating up these thugs, as they rightfully should, cleaning up the streets of Amsterdam, came out and retraced his steps. He said, this is where 1 happened, this is where A, B, C happened.
Let me take you to Amsterdam and show you what really happened. So, behind me is where the Maccabi hooligans climbed a building and tore down the Palestinian flag. And here they attacked a cab driver and damaged his car with a bicycle chain. Broke it. On the day of the match, the Maccabi fans gathered here at the Dam Square. Protected by the police, they chanted their insulting and racist slurs. Then they got a police escort and walked here towards Central Station. Just before taking the metro to the football stadium, the Maccabi fans chanted slurs like "Dead to the Arab, fuck Palestine," and the worst one, "There's no school in Gaza because all of the children are dead." Based on this, do you think there was an unjustified attack on Jewish people, or did the people from Amsterdam react to hooligans that attacked first and hurt your beautiful city? You decide, but don't forget. Assalamu alaikum.
And the really funny thing is that everyone was like, wow, this man is beautiful. Turns out he's a model.
Of course, yeah. I do have to say, the Dutch are typically a very good-looking race.
Yes.
They're very tall and good-looking, yes.
And he's become a bit viral on Instagram, and then he'll show the Instagram insights and analytics. 95% of his story views are coming out of Israel now.
Wow.
Yes.
That's interesting. That is very
And he was very like, haha, keep watching.
Yeah.
I love that. So that video is interesting.
Yeah. And I think we've seen as well recently, we had a similar thing happen in Paris.
That's true.
Also, when I believe it was, I'm not sure specifically what team was playing, but we've seen a similar thing play out. I haven't seen the same amount of news coverage since this one, though. I think... I'll put it this way: if you have two football hooligan fan bases getting into a fight on the street, which I'm sure happens every day in Europe, it doesn't usually make the news.
No.
So I think they've realised that maybe this we've squeezed all the milk out of this cow that we can, and let's just not report it in the future, even though it is still
That happened,
Yeah.
and I also believe they really couldn't put a spin on this because it was one man held up a Palestinian flag, and then he was swarmed
Really?
by like 15, 20 men and beaten up so badly. So they obviously couldn't put a spin on that.
Yeah, there's not really
And that's
not really
the
a
thing,
victim
James.
spin.
The violence will not contain itself. It will spread. It will come to you, people. If you don't put your foot down, if you don't oppose it, if you don't normalize the genocide going on, the violence inflicted on the Palestinians, guess what? It's coming home.
Come home to us.
It doesn't. It never contains itself.
And I think that repression, the technologies, like the technologies of the repression and the tactics of the repression, I guess these like you're saying, they can all be used against us at the end of the day, against us good, law-abiding citizens, regardless. So,
as Anthony Lowenstein said, I know you mentioned him last time.
Fantastic.
A great book, The Palestine Laboratory. Israel exports its technology of violence. And eventually, if it's so normalized to annihilate Gaza, which they will never do, they're not going to stop there. They're not going to be like Project Done. Yeah, the project of Greater Israel, and then eventually the world.
Yes. We're all in Gaza essentially at the end of the day. But it's interesting. I've just obviously talking about mentioning Anthony Lowenstein's book. They export the technology of repression. Well, in order to have growth in that sector of business, that would require more repression, correct?
That's true.
So that's an interesting thing to think about, obviously.
And I wonder what it's going to look like. Trump's cabinet will support it, obviously. They'll be behind it. They'll supply it.
Yes.
Oh, what a time.
And again, how it'll impact us. And I think coming back to Trump, just to finish up, how that will reflect Aussie politics as well. Because unfortunately, it is... and same with the UK also, we do seem to reflect essentially the political trends over there also. So I really don't really want Peter Dutton to be in.
Not at all, no.
I'm very critical of Albanese, but I've talked about this before. I think he's probably, maybe a slightly better, like in terms of actually managing the state. I think they do a better job. I think lots of things will not change in terms of foreign policy. I think domestically there probably would be some changes.
Oh, absolutely.
But lots of angry, disenfranchised young people and old people as well are keen on Dutton, which is terrifying.
It is terrifying. Things will change dramatically. Well, not dramatically, domestically. That's under Dutton, because he's expressed his discontent to all these Palestine protests going on, and I'm sure he would like to pass a bill or two against the Palestine protests.
Yeah, outlawing protest. It'd probably be called the Combating Anti-Semitism Bill or something like that.
Yeah. Under Albanese, we deployed an anti-Semitism
convoy.
We
did. Yes, we did. Oh, look, crazy times we live in. Absolutely crazy times. Do you have anything else to say, Habiba?
Palestinians are Semites. That's what I have to say.
That's a strong statement. I appreciate that. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Habiba will be joining me for the next couple of weeks while Geordie is away. So, if you enjoy the content, like, comment, subscribe. Habiba, thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
Had a blast. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you.